Hello everyone, and welcome to my ranking of the top 10 best bosses in God of War Ragnarok. I use a few different personal criteria when determining my ranking of the bosses, but ultimately, it's a ranking of how much I like them. So that's what it'll come down to at the end of the day. If you guys disagree, well, be sure to share that down in the comments. Without any further ado, like and subscribe if you haven't already, and let's get right down to business. In the number 10 spot, I have Vanadis, also known as Freya. Do you guys like the Valkyrie bosses from 2018? I also like the Valkyrie bosses. I think they're pretty good. And Vanadis is pretty much just a Valkyrie, again, but with a few things mixed up a little bit, using a different weapon, has a few new moves added in, and has a bit more of the narrative and emotional impact of it being Freya. Yeah, that's pretty much all I gotta say about that one. In the number 9 spot, I have the Berserker King Hrolf. This is one of the few bosses I'm going to have some negatives to talk about, but it's just kind of a byproduct of what he is. Hrolf is this game's equivalent to Sigrun, minus the actual Valkyrie Queen we fight, and by that I mean he is the super boss we fight at the end of a questline in which we go around fighting a bunch of different variations of the same template in the form of the Berserkers. Thus, Hrolf is an amalgamation of all of the Berserkers, minus the gank fights. Thank God. However, some of the Berserkers still have some issues, some attacks that I find to be generally kind of really annoying, and Hrolf has those. So while he does have a lot of the really good stuff from the Berserker fights, he also has some of the really annoying stuff from some of the Berserker fights. And when you're in a list of the top 10 best bosses in a game that has a lot of really good bosses, that's going to drag you down a little bit to the lower half. So that's why he finds himself here at the number 9 spot. In the number 8 spot, I have Hrist and Myst. What's better than one Valkyrie? Well, Valkyrie Queen, but other than that, 2 Valkyries. But not just 2 Valkyries. 2 Valkyries actually optimized to be a duo fight, something this game generally does pretty well. Unlike a certain other game that came out this year that was really good, but had some questionable boss design choices, this fight functions really well. It doesn't have anything, mechanically at least, that really blows me away, but it's just nice. It just doesn't really have any problems. You know, it gets progressively difficult with each phase, they get new attacks, they do some more damage, but there's nothing added that I think is annoying. You put that in combination with probably the most beautiful arena in the entire game, and one of the coolest finishers in the entire series, and you get yourself the number 8 spot in this list. In the number 7 spot, I have Nidhogg. They're not quite big enough to be a colossal boss, so I guess they join the pantheon of big beast bosses, among which they're honestly one of the best, because the spectacle is not the most notable thing about this fight, it's actually the mechanics. This fight is actually fairly mechanically complex. They have a lot of different attacks, you have to go about dodging them in different ways. There are different ways that you are supposed to attack them in each phase in order to be most efficient. All in all, it's incredibly satisfying to fight. In addition to that, I think the phase transitions and the slight arena changes between phases are really good. I also like Freya's involvement in the fight. Some people are kind of annoyed by her mild backseating, but when you consider the context of what's going on, it explains that she'd be not very patient about you killing this thing. And then, she helps you out with it, and gives you what may be the coolest finisher. Actually, no. You still get Hrist and Myst's dad-boy duo finisher, but I suppose Doctor Stranging Nidhogg is like probably a close second, all things considered. All in all, a really good boss. In the number 6 spot, I have Heimdall. I suppose Ghoultoper is technically part of this fight, but I'm not really taking them much into consideration. My primary concern is Heimdall himself, for a few reasons. First one, he's a humanoid boss. And if you know me, you know I love humanoid bosses. I love when enemies fight you on a somewhat even playing field and operate under fairly similar mechanics to you. Heimdall, I would argue, is perhaps most mechanically similar to us, the player, because he seems to be the only other enemy that ever uses Realm Shift. Dodging his attacks, or parrying his attacks in Realm Shift, is incredibly cool. It's very satisfying. I haven't tried this out myself yet, but I hope that you can activate Realm Shift to move within his own Realm Shift. That would be really, really cool, having a time-stop battle. The other thing that makes this fight really satisfying is finally beating this little rat bastard's ass. They did a really good job building him up as an annoying, hateable antagonist in the short amount of time that you met him. So it felt pretty good to finally draw some blood on him for the first time. To blow his arm off and to strangle the life out of him, though you probably weren't supposed to get satisfaction out of that last one, narratively speaking, but, I mean, come on. Everyone really enjoyed it. In fact, a lot of us wanted it to go a little bit further, but, you know, can't sacrifice the good narrative and all that stuff. I'm sure this fight also benefits from the fact that you mostly have to use Draupnir when fighting him, and Draupnir is the shit. It is phenomenal. So yeah, Heimdall, pretty damn good. Big fan. In the number 5 spot, I have Garm, the big colossal spectacle boss for this game. A pretty massive step up from Praisler in the last game. I think Garm is definitely one of the best colossal bosses in the series. This is for a handful of reasons. For starters, Spectacle's pretty cool, but that's nothing new for the big spectacle bosses. He's actually got some pretty solid mechanics. The entire fight seems to be centered around attacking his head, because while he does have this big giant model, it seems like for the most part, you're just fighting his head. Anytime you hit him, his head slides closer to you. They took some notes from Midir and realized that there is a way to make fighting a giant boss pretty satisfying. This is also a bit of a minor detail, but I think the camera in this fight is really good. You never really lose track of what's going on or get really confused because of weird camera angles, unlike with, occasionally, Midir and a lot of big Dark Souls bosses. The finisher for this first phase is quite satisfying. You snap his neck, but then there's more. Like any great colossal boss, Garm chases you throughout the level because he's undead, he can't die, he has no soul, and you can't kill something that's not alive. Then you get to the second phase, which I don't think is quite as good, but still pretty solid, and functions a little bit differently. You're not so much chasing him around this big arena now, you're more so staying in this one area as he rushes in and does some attacks on you. And then you get the best of both worlds. You get the somewhat brutal finisher from the first phase, and to finish off the second phase, you get a big dog. The biggest dog. It's great. It's lovely. I love the big dog. It's wonderful. So yeah, Garm rounds out the bottom of the top 5 best bosses in God of War Ragnarok. In the number 4 spot, I have the Valkyrie Queen, Gná. It's been a while since I've fought Sigrun, so I don't know how accurately I can put this, but I think I may like Gná more than Sigrun. And that's because Gná is more original. I mentioned earlier that the Berserker King Hrolf is effectively this game's version of Sigrun because he's an amalgamation of a bunch of other bosses that follow the same template. Gná, on the other hand, is pretty much unique. I know she has a few moves that she shares from Vanadis a bit, and more so from Priest and Mist because, well, they have more moves, and use much more similar weapons to her. But she has quite a few attacks that are all her own that none of the other bosses use. And that's something that I personally like a bit more than a boss that's just a bunch of other bosses put into one. Now, Gná is very difficult. I think for the most part, she's fair. It took me about 2 hours to beat her, maybe like 2.5. And I never thought anything was completely unfair. But I do think she has a few attacks that are a bit unreasonable. For Asgard can be a bit annoying. I think the one that caught me the most, or the two that caught me the most, were the Wing Pierce, because the telegraphing on that is not very good. It just seems to kind of happen most of the time. And then her dash grab attack. I felt the hitbox on that was a little bit questionable at times, but who knows? Maybe that's just a skill issue on my part. I wouldn't be surprised. Either way, I'm putting her at the number 4 spot, so clearly I like her quite a bit in spite of those things. In the number 3 spot, I have the second Thor fight. Ranking this in comparison to the other Thor fight was really difficult because one of them is really, really good mechanically, while the other one has some decent mechanics, but more so is really good in terms of spectacle. This is the one that's better in terms of mechanics. And when I say it's better, I mean it's one of the best bosses in the game in terms of mechanics. It's the first Thor fight, but even better. Even more moves, even more difficult versions of the moves he used in the first fight. It's great. It's really fun to fight him. And his phase transitions are wonderful. I really like them. But the thing this fight lacks for the final battle against Thor and the penultimate boss fight of the game is spectacle. You just kind of fight him in Odin's yard. Compare that to the first fight against him, and you can see it's really sorely lacking in that department. There was a lot they could have done to make this fight stand out more in terms of spectacle. You could have fought him on the back of Jormungandr, or you could have been flying around Asgard like you were during the first fight in Midgard, but you just kind of didn't. I don't exactly know why. I don't know if that was some kind of time thing, or if they just really couldn't think of anything to do. The fight's still great, but I think it would have been even better, as in it may have been the best fight in the game, for me, if it had a little bit more of that spectacle. But oh well, fight's still pretty phenomenal as it is. In the number 2 spot, I have Odin. This fight is pretty much everything I wanted it to be mechanically. He's a very strong contrast to Zeus, who does use some magic, but for the most part is a brawler. He's getting up close and personal and trying to beat you into a red paste with his fists. Odin, on the other hand, is a mage. He's a caster. He's a wizard. And he uses a lot of different magical spells that he fires at you from range. Yeah, he gets up close sometimes, and he does have some magic that he can use at close range. But for the most part, this guy is using spells from his magical book of secrets. And he has a lot of different spells that use a lot of different mechanics. As a matter of fact, I think he uses pretty much every single mechanic in the game as his attacks, which is what a final boss is supposed to do. Final boss is supposed to be the last test of your knowledge and mastery of the game. It should be you testing yourself against all of the mechanics that you should have learned how to play with throughout the entire game's runtime. And that's pretty much what he does. All of his spells have basically every different type of attack, or every different type of element that you've encountered throughout your entire journey in Ragnarok. So, in terms of that, he's great. But once again, like the Thor fight, I think this one is kind of lacking in spectacle. I kind of wish that Odin got his mask, he put it on, found out what the fuck was in that rift. God damn you, Atreus, for keeping these secrets from me. And you, like, I don't know, fought him in a higher plane, or throughout the flow of time or something. It could have been peak. I mean, I already think it's pretty peak, but it could have been the peak. It could have been the best boss in the series if you added in something like that. And instead it's like one of the best bosses in the series instead of the best boss in the series. In the number 1 spot is my personal choice for the best boss in God of War Ragnarok. I have the first fight against Thor. This fight has so much going for it. 4 years of anticipation from the end of God of War 2018. You finally meet him, and it's a bit of a subversion, honestly. I did not expect you to invite him in for tea, pretty much, or for his dad to show up and you guys basically have a mob meeting. But my god, does that, 10-minute scene do a really good job at building up tension, because the whole time, you're just waiting for shit to hit the fan. And when it hits the fan, oh my god, does it. This is the best spectacle in the game. It's one of the best spectacles in the whole series. Thor flinging you around with Mjolnir, going pretty much all around Midgard. The only thing this fight lacks in, honestly, is mechanics, and that's just because it's one of the first bosses in the game. He's not supposed to be super mechanically complex. I mean, he's pretty complex for when you fight him. He's the most complex enemy you fight up until that point, but comparing him to almost all of the other bosses on this list, he's pretty basic. But that's made up for in spades by the absolute splendor of fighting Thor. There are so many great, memorable moments in this fight. Him sending you flying with Mjolnir, plunging your axe into his stomach, the defibrillator. God, that fake out was phenomenal. And the clash of the weapons, the frozen lightning. It's all just, it's so good. It's just so wonderful. It's everything I could have hoped for this fight to be and more. I have it as the second best boss in the series. I'm serious when I say, if we took the second Thor fight mechanically, you took the mechanics of that fight, and then you put it into this fight, or you took that fight and you gave it this level of spectacle, it'd be the best boss in the series in my opinion. Zeus, at the end of God of War 3, would finally be dethroned as the best boss in the series, but I suppose Thor 1 is going to have to settle for being the second best boss in the series, and the best boss in God of War Ragnarok. But what do you guys think? This is ultimately just my opinion on the bosses in the game. And one of my favorite things about these sorts of videos is seeing what you guys think, so be sure to share it down in the comments. But with that, that's all for today's video. If you enjoyed, please be sure to like, comment, and subscribe so you don't miss any of my uploads. I have an entire playlist doing my playthrough of God of War 2018 and God of War Ragnarok, as well as a previous video ranking my top 10 favorite bosses in the series. If I ever redid that one, well, obviously, few of the ones from this video would make it in now. But yeah, check that out if you think you may be interested in that. That's all. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys around. Until next time, take care.